there, and welcome back. Well, today I have back on my bench the Groma Kolibri. This typewriter started out with my friend Kevin. He bought it from an online seller. I worked on it several times over the last couple years, mainly dealing with intermittent skipping issues. Then finally, Kevin last year gave it to me. I did a lot of work to it. I was never able to fully resolve the skipping issues at that time, and then in a fit of downsizing, I decided maybe I would give it back to Kevin, but more recently I've acquired it again, and last week I went through and did a lot of work to this machine. I identified 9 specific problems that I addressed, and let's go through those one by one in roughly the order that I tackled them. Well, the first problem I had was some shading on the bottom of the lowercase characters, and so this is a carriage shift machine, so these are the adjustments for the on, feet, and motion. I have it currently in the shift lock position, so when it's in this position right here, this set screw sets the lowercase position, and of course you want to loosen the nut up here with a metric wrench. This is a 5.5 millimeter nut, so you need a 5.5 millimeter wrench. Loosen that, set the height, test it, tighten it down, and make sure both sides are done evenly. Okay, the next thing after the lowercase is set is you're going to want to set the uppercase to match the lowercase, and the uppercase is set with this screw, which limits how high the carriage moves up, and it works the same way. It's the same size 5.5 millimeter nut with an adjustment screw. It is a little tight in here, and this particular wrench of mine is a little wide, and I really ideally would need to cut this down and make these a little bit narrower, or buy a different brand of wrenches that is a little bit narrower, but it can be tight in here. It doesn't always allow you the room to turn these when it's so wide, but 5.5 millimeter, and you want to adjust both of these left and right side the same amount. Okay, the next problem I wanted to tackle is the ribbon wasn't auto-reversing, and so this particular typewriter doesn't use eyelets for a reversing system. So you might notice here there is no slotted or forked guide that causes auto-reversing. The way the auto-reversing happens is these two arms that push up against the pack of ribbon, the angle of that arm determines when the auto-reversing happens. When this arm gets far enough in toward the center of the shaft of the ribbon is when it trips the reversing, and that adjustment is done underneath the typewriter. Okay, we're looking underneath the machine at the left ribbon spool mechanism, and this arm right here, the pivot point is here. That is the shaft for that guide that touches the ribbon pack. And you basically have to reform or slightly bend this arm to alter the angle at which it will engage this gear here and causes it to switch over. And so if you switch to a ribbon of a different length, then the pack of ribbon will be a different diameter, and it'll alter when this reversing happens. So you want to make sure you're consistent about using the same size ribbons in these machines. So this shaft will slide back and forth based on the reversing action, and there's a little spring-loaded arm that hits this biconic-shaped cam on this shaft here, and that's basically your reversing action right there. And there's an identical mechanism on the right side. This shaft that slides back and forth, there are some points right here where they're rubbing against these brackets, and this bracket here kind of keeps this shaft straight. And so you want to make sure these are cleaned, and there's like a slide bushing that it slides through in several different places. And you want to make sure all those are very clean and grease-free, so this thing turns as easily as it can. And this right here is the manual ribbon reversing. Okay, the next thing that I worked on was the type alignment. There was a number of characters whose alignment was less than ideal. The way these type slugs work is it has a heel at the bottom of the type slug. Below the type slug there's a little heel that sticks down. right here. That heel actually goes through the gap of the type guide, right? And the type slug is actually above it. So the type slug isn't going through the type guide, it's the little heel on the bottom that is. And so you not only have the angle of the type slug relative to the main part of the type bar to adjust, to get the characters up and down vertically parallel where they should be, but you also have the angle of this heel that can be reformed in order to get it to pass through this narrow gap without any rubbing on either side. And then in addition, like a lot of type bar alignments, you also have the angle of the type bar itself. You can make real subtle S-curve bends, or maybe bend it in one or two places to try to affect a change side to side, or sort of a diagonal effect. These characters that are more out toward the edge of the segment, their adjustments end up going like on the right side. You end up adjusting things more either upper right or lower left direction by bending these. So if you bend the type bar like down here, then you want to bend the angle up here to restore the verticalness of the type bar. So you're sort of doing an S-curve kind of thing. It's a really subtle adjustments, but I had one character that was a real problem, and that was the Q. It was kind of crooked initially, but once I straightened it out and got the heel of this type slug so that it goes through the gap straight and the Q was vertical, it would double strike and make a shadow impression on the paper. And as I studied it, the more and more I realized if I hit the keys really hard, a lot of the other uppercase characters were doing that. It was only happening in the uppercase, which is kind of odd, but you can see the way when the carriage shifts up, maybe the angle at which the face of the type slug strikes the platen is a little bit different than in the down position, right? So couldn't get the double striking to go away without putting this little piece of gaffer's tape on the segment here on the crescent shaped anvil. And all that does is it sort of just cushions the blow of the little part of the type bar that strikes the anvil. It cushions that blow and keeps it from bouncing, and it seems to work okay. Now you might notice that the trip point is pretty close to where the type bar strikes the platen, the escapement trip point. It is a design that tends to strike really close to when the platen starts to move, but somehow uppercase characters were doing a little bouncing. Not anymore though, I don't have any of that now. And I think the extra tension that I put on the escapement rocker with the add-on spring really made a difference there. This arm right here is the escapement rocker, and it goes like that whenever a letter or a space is hit. And this side of it right here is hit by the space bar. The space bar right here activates the escapement rocker from the left. And then this side over here, this arm, is actuated by this bracket pushing up, and that's pushed by the keys when they strike the segment. There is a cam adjustment on the right side up here. It's hard to see. You have to get to it from the right side with a screwdriver. There's an adjustment cam that hits this. In fact, this right here, this surface is that cam. It strikes this arm, and the real problem this had was it was mainly skipping on bouncy surfaces like those expanded metal patio tables, that kind of thing. And I thought at the time that it just didn't have enough spring tension, and so what I've done here is you can see there is a spring right here. And this is from a kit of VCR parts that I had laying around in my workshop for years and years. These were spare VCR springs, and I attached one of these springs between this arm and a convenient bracket right here. And what that does is it gives me more spring tension. The escapement rocker is snappier to snap back to the rest position now with this additional spring here. I should also make mention that another complexity to this escapement system is that because it's a carriage shift machine, when it is shifted, that the angle of that cam is different, or it's a different position relative to the arm that it strikes, and at the lowercase position, which is here, the cam is in a slightly different place because the escapement rocker is built onto the carriage, whereas the arm here that strikes it is built onto the frame of the typewriter. So adjusting this movable cam here involves doing so the gap between the cam and the surface of the striker arm is the same amount of space both in uppercase and lowercase like that. Otherwise, you could have skipping that happens only in uppercase or only in lowercase, right? So that screw right there has to be adjusted on this arm. But putting the additional spring here on the escapement rocker seems to have fixed that skipping problem, and I'm happy about that. Yet another problem this machine had was the right margin line lock wasn't working properly, and it was because this little arm right here was too far down. It was hitting the rocker engagement arm and it wasn't going over it. So when you get to the right margin, it should cover it like that, and it keeps the escapement rocker from tripping. And that's what prevents you from typing an additional letter at the right margin. Okay, the next problem that I had is the typewriter would make a slight clunking sound caused by this slight side-to-side movement of the carriage as you typed. And it was just caused by the action of the escapement on the rack gear. And it's really involving the gap in here between this adjustable set screw and the plate on the side of the carriage. This plate, this goes up and down, of course, for the shifting, but there was too much of a gap in here. The nut is right here. This is a threaded shaft, a hexagonal part of it, and then the little button on the end that it rubs against there. But it needed I think it's a 3.5 millimeter wrench, and I only had a 3.2 or a 4 in my kit, so I had to make do with a American Standard wrench of nearly the right size, bent a little bit. But anyways, I was able to tighten this gap up and also the equivalent one on the other side to reduce that side-to-side play, and that got rid of the loud clunking sound it would make whenever you typed, which was really just an irritation. Well, another thing I did to this machine, it wasn't really an adjustment per se, but these Kolibris do not have a bichrome setting. It's a single color machine. I was using a 2-color ribbon just because at the time it was the only one I had, so I went ahead and put in a new all black ribbon. Okay, the next thing I've done with this machine is not really a mechanical adjustment, but it's more of a usage, and that is realizing that despite having a new ribbon in it, the imprint is not as dark as I'd like because the platen is probably shrunk a little bit due to age, and there is no adjustment to the back and forth position of the carriage. It's pinned permanently. So I've gone to using some kind of a backing sheet just as a permanent way of using this. Currently I'm using a piece of construction paper, but I've also been using this 1/64 inch thin sheet of rubber that I bought online, and both of these methods work pretty well, but I think the construction paper works just about the same as the rubber, so there's no real need to go to the trouble of buying the sheet rubber, but it does help make a little bit more consistent imprint and a little bit darker, and so that's just another kind of a usage of this machine that I'm just going to have to realize it needs, is a backing sheet. I think one thing I've really learned working repeatedly on this typewriter is that projects like this are a process. They aren't a one-time get it done, it's done. There's always a constant improvement process. None of these mechanical marvels are perfect. They probably weren't perfect when they came out of the factory. The process that I hope to pursue is making these machines better over time so that they can become more of a creative tool for my use. That's what I want my typewriter collection to be, is practical tools that I can get on with the business of creating. I want the typewriter to disappear. I want it to fall into the background, to fade into the background so that the only thing in the forefront of my mind are the words that I'm putting down on paper. That's the ideal state for me. For you, you might have a different goal with collecting typewriters. But so for me, mechanical
reliability and performance is uppermost, because any of those things that don't work right become a distraction to keeping you from creating properly. So working on this machine has been a process, and it's better now than when it was. It's probably not yet perfect, and I probably won't get it to be perfect, if you will, but as long as it doesn't distract me from the business of writing. And these 9 things that I've done to this machine over the period of the last week or so really has brought this machine to a new point, I think, in terms of how it works for me and my confidence in being able to take it out places and use it and have fun with it. Well, I really enjoyed working on this machine. It's a beauty. It's hard to argue with the aesthetics of it, and now it performs all that much better. I hope you guys find satisfaction in your creative ventures. And until next time, stay well. Have a great day. Bye-bye.